She arrived at the conference center early in the morning, her uniform crisp but plain, her hands already carrying the smell of cleaning supplies from the start of her shift. The building was enormous, glass and steel giant that reflected the sunrise in a way that made it feel like the city itself was waking up just to watch it. Every morning she walked through the revolving doors with the same mix of determination and invisibility, knowing that most people would never see her, never think of her as anything more than someone who made the space neat and presentable. She had learned to blend into the background, to move quickly and quietly, to follow instructions without question. The main hall was already buzzing with activity. Chairs were being arranged, microphones tested, and trays of water and coffee were lined up on polished tables. She moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, wiping down surfaces, aligning chairs, and emptying trash bins. The managers had instructed her to make the hall spotless. To ensure that nothing distracted the executives who would arrive later, "Just clean the tables," they had said, as if that were the only thing that mattered about her presence. She smiled politely and nodded, hiding the resentment that bubbled inside her every time she heard the words. It was a small space for her dreams, but she had learned to survive within it as she worked. Her mind drifted to memories she rarely allowed herself to think about. Years ago, she had spent countless hours at a piano, fingers dancing across the keys, creating music that could make people cry or smile without a single word. She had loved it with every fiber of her being. But life had not been kind. Her family had needed her in ways that could not be ignored. And she had put aside her passion to earn money, to pay bills, to survive. She told herself she had chosen the practical path, but the truth was that the piano had never left her heart. It lived in the quiet corners of her mind, in the brief moments when she allowed herself to remember the sound of a perfectly struck chord or the thrill of a melody that seemed to write itself. The cleaning staff worked together like a silent team, each person knowing their role without the need for words. She moved from table to table, polishing surfaces until they gleamed. Her eyes scanned the room constantly, checking that everything was in order. She noticed small things that others might miss: a faint smudge on a glass, a chair slightly askew, a crumb under a plate. Attention to detail had always been part of her nature, a habit formed not just from training but from necessity. In this environment, perfection mattered, but only when someone else noticed. Most of the time, her work went unacknowledged. She had learned to find satisfaction in her own standards. Even if others never praised her, she paused for a moment near the edge of the room, looking at the large windows that revealed the city stretching out below. The sunlight touched her face, warming her skin, as if encouraging her to take a breath, to pause, to be seen. She didn't. She bent down to pick up a small piece of paper someone had dropped, feeling the weight of invisibility settle back onto her shoulders. No one had asked about her day. No one had complimented her work. And she knew that as soon as the meeting began, she would be nothing more than a shadow moving along the walls as she continued her work. She heard voices from the other side of the hall. Executives were arriving, their conversations low but urgent, filled with technical terms, financial jargon, and strategies she did not understand but could sense were important. The energy in the room shifted immediately as soon as they walked in. There was a tension that made the air feel thick, a feeling that decisions here could change lives, fortunes, and futures. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb anything, careful not to attract attention. Yet, in the corner of the room, her eyes caught something familiar: piano. It was grand but worn, its black surface dull from years of neglect. Its keys slightly yellowed but still intact. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen a piano in years that reminded her of her own hands, her own music. For a moment, she lingered, letting her fingers hover over the keys without touching them. The memory was immediate and sharp, the weight of the keys. The sound vibrating through her fingers, the way music could fill a room and reach every corner of the soul. She had pushed it all away to survive, but seeing the piano here made it impossible to ignore. She quickly reminded herself of her role, of the instruction she had been given. She was here to clean, not to play. The day passed in a blur of movement and instructions. She wiped tables, arranged chairs, and followed the cleaning checklist with meticulous care. She noticed the stress on the faces of the staff around her, the pressure of preparing for an important event. There was no room for mistakes, no margin for error. Yet in the small moments when she was alone, she allowed herself to glance at the piano, to feel the pull of the music she had left behind. It was dangerous to dream in a place where dreams had been dismissed, but she couldn't stop herself. It was the only part of her that still belonged entirely to her. During lunch, she sat quietly in a corner with a simple sandwich, watching the executives move through the hall, discussing numbers and deals, their voices low but commanding. She wondered if they could sense anything beyond the spreadsheets and graphs, anything beyond the agendas and presentations. She felt a pang of sadness. The world outside seemed so focused on profit, on power, on outcomes that could be measured in dollars and cents, while she carried something immeasurable within her. Music, passion, talent, all things that mattered deeply but could not be quantified or bargained for. Her break was short, and she returned to her work with a sense of duty that was almost automatic. She wiped surfaces, dusted corners, and straightened chairs with a rhythm that mirrored the old piano scales she used to play. Each motion was deliberate, a silent echo of what she had once known. The hall began to fill with more staff, assistants, and last-minute arrivals. She moved among them, a ghost performing her tasks without drawing attention, without expecting recognition. As the afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the polished floor, she found herself again near the piano. She reached out, brushing her fingers across the keys lightly, careful not to press too hard, careful that no one noticed. The coldness of the keys against her skin was both a shock and a comfort. She could almost hear the music that used to pour from her hands, the melodies that had once made her feel alive. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting the memory wash over her. No one saw, no one spoke, and the room continued its preparation for the meeting, oblivious to the life that lingered quietly in the corner. By the time the executives arrived for their final preparations, she had returned fully to her role. She moved quickly, wiping down tables, adjusting chairs, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. Her hands were sore, her back tired, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had done her job well. Yet beneath that satisfaction was a restless longing, a small flame that refused to die. The piano remained in her mind, a symbol of what she had given up, and what might still be possible, as the first executives entered the hall for the main meeting. She stepped back to the edges of the room, invisible once more. She watched them take their seats, discuss strategies, and prepare for negotiations that would shape billions of dollars. She smiled faintly to herself, knowing that her life was worlds apart from theirs, yet connected in this small, fleeting space. The piano waited in the corner, silent witness to her past and a promise of something more. The day stretched on, and the energy in the hall grew tense. She moved like a shadow, unseen, unnoticed, but acutely aware of everything happening around her. The importance of the meeting, the power in the room, and the weight of expectations pressed on her, yet she held herself steady. She was just the cleaner, they said, but she carried something within her that could not be measured or dismissed. She carried the music of a lifetime, talent that had been paused but never extinguished. As the first day drew to a close, the hall emptied except for the cleaning staff and her. She lingered for a moment near the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, the memories almost unbearable in their intensity. She allowed herself a deep breath, acknowledging the pull of her passion and the quiet hope that perhaps one day it would be more than just a memory. She wiped down one last table, collected her supplies, and left the hall with the same quiet determination she had carried all day. Invisible to the world, yet profoundly present in her own life. She walked through the glass doors into the fading light of the city, unaware that tomorrow everything might change. The next morning, the woman arrived at the conference center earlier than usual, the streets quiet and bathed in soft golden light. She carried her cleaning supplies in the same worn bag, but today there was a tension in the air, a mixture of anticipation and something she could not quite name. As she walked through the doors, the familiar smell of polished wood and coffee greeted her, and the hall stretched out before her, bathed in morning light. Everything was ready for the day, Yet she felt a strange pull toward the corner where the piano sat, black and silent, waiting patiently for something it did not know would come. She began her tasks methodically, wiping down tables and checking chairs, moving through the hall as if on autopilot. But her mind kept drifting to the piano, the keys that had once been extensions of her own fingers. She remembered the hours she had spent practicing, the music that had poured from her soul and filled rooms with emotion. She had given it all up to survive, but the memory had never left her, and now it tugged at her insistently. Every so often, she found herself glancing at it, her fingers itching to touch the smooth, worn keys. The hall was quiet at first, the other staff still arriving, the cleaning routine starting slowly. She let herself linger near the piano, running her hands along the edges, feeling the slight imperfections in the wood, the faint scratches that told stories of past performances. It was not polished, it was not new, but it had character, a soul that seemed to mirror her own. She imagined the music it could produce, the melodies that could rise and fill the air, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes and remember the sound of her fingers on keys, the vibrations that had once moved her and others. 2 tears. A new task interrupted her thoughts. She moved to a table near the center of the hall, arranging glasses and trays with water and coffee. Every motion was careful, precise, a reflection of her attention to detail and dedication. But even as she worked, the piano called to her. She could hear it in her mind, each note a whisper, a plea to remember. The day's schedule was strict, and she knew she could not allow herself to be distracted. Yet the pull grew stronger with every passing hour, as the first staff and assistants began to prepare for the arrival of the executives. She noticed small signs of tension. People were talking in low voices, checking schedules, moving quickly from one task to another. There was pressure in the air, a sense that everything had to be perfect, that any mistake could have consequences. She understood this better than anyone, having worked in this environment for years. Mistakes were often invisible, but carried weight, and perfection was expected, even from those no one saw. She moved among them, unnoticed. Her presence almost a shadow, yet every action deliberate. Every motion efficient. During a brief pause in her work, she allowed herself a moment to approach the piano more closely. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, careful not to press them, but savoring the feel of the cold, smooth surfaces beneath her touch. Memories came flooding back, the scales she had learned, the pieces she had mastered, the hours of practice that had once consumed her life. Music had been her refuge, her joy, her voice when words had failed. She had believed she could never return to it. Yet the piano seemed to offer an invitation, a gentle encouragement to remember who she was beyond the uniform and the cleaning supplies. A small sound startled her. One of the assistants had walked by, glancing at her curiously but not stopping. She straightened quickly, returning to her cleaning tasks, pretending that the piano had not been a part of her thoughts. But the pull did not fade. As she moved around the hall, her eyes kept returning to it. The keys seemed to beckon, whispering stories of possibilities, of moments where she could reclaim part of herself that had been hidden for too long. The morning passed with the usual rhythm of preparation, but she found herself more aware of the piano than ever. She noticed the way the sunlight hit its surface, the way shadows played across the keys, the way it seemed to wait patiently for someone to bring it to life. The other staff were busy, focused on tasks, but she felt an internal tension, a struggle between duty and desire, between the role she had been given and the part of her that had always dreamed of music. During lunch, she sat quietly in the corner with her sandwich, watching the preparations continue. Her hands shook slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the intensity of the longing she felt. She remembered performances long ago, the feeling of an audience hanging on every note, the way music had once made her feel both powerful and vulnerable. The piano in the hall seemed to hold that same promise, a chance to step out of invisibility and into expression, even if only for a fleeting moment after lunch. She returned to her cleaning tasks, but her mind was no longer fully on the work. She found herself imagining melodies, the way her fingers would move across the keys, the harmonies that could fill the space. She ran her hands over the keys again, feeling the cold touch against her skin, remembering the sensation of creating sound that was entirely her own. The piano seemed alive, as if it understood her unspoken desire and waited patiently for her to act. The afternoon grew busier as more staff arrived, preparing the final details for the executives' meeting. She moved among them, unnoticed, yet acutely aware of every sound, every movement, every shift in energy. She polished tables, aligned chairs, and swept the floor, but each motion was infused with a quiet tension. The piano called to her, a persistent whisper that grew louder with every passing hour. It was as if it remembered her, as if it knew the music that had once flowed from her hands and waited for her to return. During a short break, she lingered by the piano, her heart racing. She could no longer resist the temptation. She sat on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. The hall was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. She pressed a key lightly, the sound resonating softly, a single note that seemed to echo through the room. Her heart leaped, and for a moment she forgot everything else: the cleaning, the orders, the invisibility. She played another note, then another, her fingers finding their rhythm instinctively, as if they had never stopped. The music began to flow, tentative at first. Then, with increasing confidence, filling the hall with sound that was both beautiful and unexpected. She did not hear footsteps approaching, nor did she notice the shadow that fell across the keys. She was lost in the music, in the sensation of creating something that belonged to her entirely. The piano seemed to respond, its old wood vibrating with life, the notes carrying emotion she had thought long buried. Every chord, every melody was a release, a reclamation of a part of herself that had been ignored, dismissed, and hidden away for too long as she played. Memories surged through her lessons with patient teachers, recitals that had brought tears of pride, hours of solitary practice that had honed her skill. She remembered the joy, the frustration, the discipline, and the love she had poured into music. It was all alive in her fingers now, a living expression of who she was beyond the uniform, beyond the cleaning, beyond the expectations of others. The notes floated through the hall, soft yet commanding, carrying a presence that could not be ignored. The sound seemed to awaken the room, and she felt a thrill she had not known in years. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to be seen by the music, to exist fully in the moment, without apology or restraint. She did not know who would hear her, or what the consequences might be, but she did not care. The piano had called her, and she had answered. She played for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. The melodies were a mix of memory and improvisation, a testament to her skill and her emotional depth. She poured herself into the music, feeling every note, every pause, every vibration, as if it were a conversation with the world she had long ignored. In those moments, she was neither cleaner nor invisible, but an artist reclaiming her voice, one note at a time, eventually. The hall began to fill with the sounds of activity, the arrival of executives, the bustling of staff, the preparation of the meeting. She stopped playing, her fingers hovering above the keys for a moment, reluctant to leave the music behind. The piano remained silent, waiting patiently, as if it understood that the moment had ended but would return. She straightened, adjusted her uniform, and returned to her cleaning tasks, the memory of the music lingering in her mind, a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished. As she moved through the hall, she noticed subtle changes. The atmosphere felt different, lighter somehow, charged with the echo of her music. She was still invisible to most, still a shadow among the busy staff, but she carried within her the knowledge that she had reclaimed a part of herself. The piano had reminded her of who she was, of what she could still be, and the memory would sustain her through the rest of the day and perhaps beyond. By the end of her shift, the hall was ready, spotless, and prepared for the executive's arrival. She paused one last time near the piano, her hand resting gently on the keys. She did not play, but she did not need to. The music lingered in her mind, a promise that her story was not over, that the world had yet to hear what she could create. She gathered her supplies, walked through the quiet halls, and stepped outside into the evening air. carrying with her the quiet joy of someone who had rediscovered a piece of her soul and knew that it could never be taken away again. The morning of the big meeting arrived with an energy that could almost be felt in the air, thick and heavy with expectation. The conference center was alive with activities, staff rushing to and fro, arranging tables, checking microphones, and making sure every glass and plate was in place. She moved among them quietly, as always, cleaning and preparing, following the checklist in her mind with precision. Her uniform was crisp, her hands steady, but beneath it all, attention simmered a mixture of anticipation and the quiet pull of the piano in the corner. She glanced at it briefly as she passed, the black wood gleaming under the bright lights, the keys waiting patiently. Her fingers itched to touch them, to create the sound that had awakened her soul the day before. But she reminded herself that this was not the moment, that the meeting was important, that her role was clear. She took a deep breath and continued, wiping down the final tables, aligning chairs, making sure every detail was perfect. The executives began arriving, their presence commanding the space immediately. They moved with purpose, talking quietly but intensely, their voices carrying the weight of billions in decisions yet to be made. The room transformed from a preparation space into a chamber of high stakes, tension, and power. She stepped aside, letting them pass, ensuring her work did not interrupt their focus, blending into the background as she had done for years. As the meeting began, she moved to a corner, cleaning the edges of the room and checking that everything was in order. Her mind, however, was partially elsewhere, drawn repeatedly to the piano. She could hear the music she had imagined the day before, each note echoing in her memory, each melody reminding her of what she had set aside. The pressure of the meeting around her felt heavy, but it did not diminish the pull of the instrument, the silent invitation it extended to her. Minutes passed, and tension in the room grew. Discussions were heated, debates sharper than usual. Some of the executives gestured and spoke over each other, their words clipped and urgent. Decisions hung in the balance, and every pause felt like a crack in the fragile structure of the meeting. She moved quietly, stepping over cords, adjusting chairs, making herself as invisible as possible, yet acutely aware of every word, every gesture, every sigh. During a brief break, she was asked to tidy up near the central table. She moved quickly, straightening papers, wiping glasses, and aligning chairs. The room was temporarily empty, and the silence was profound. Her eyes drifted to the piano once more, the black surface gleaming, the keys still and patient. Her heart beat faster. She could not resist. She approached the piano slowly, almost reverently, and sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly from anticipation and nerves. She pressed one key, then another, the sound soft but clear, vibrating through the empty room. She played cautiously at first, testing her fingers, feeling the familiar sensation of the keys beneath her touch. The melodies came naturally, flowing from memory and instinct. She had not realized how much she had missed this sensation, how deeply the music was embedded in her being. As she played, she became absorbed, her body and mind attuned entirely to the sound, to the vibration, to the rhythm. The world outside the piano seemed to disappear for a moment, leaving only her and the music. Then something unexpected happened. One of the executives, returning to the room early, stopped in the doorway. He was drawn by the sound, his focus shifting instantly from the meeting agenda to the music that filled the space. He watched quietly, unsure of what he was seeing, a cleaner in uniform, playing a piano with skill and emotion that seemed impossible to ignore. He did not interrupt. Instead, he lingered, his presence unnoticed by her as she continued to play. Lost in the flow of the music, one by one, other executives began to drift in, drawn by the sound. At first they were confused, unsure of how to react. Some looked at each other, exchanging raised eyebrows and whispered questions. Who was playing? Was this part of the agenda? The room, which had been tense and focused on numbers and contracts, shifted subtly. The arguments and debates paused as people stopped to listen. The music filled every corner, soft, yet commanding, gentle, yet insistent. Weaving a thread of calm and emotion through the chaos of high-stakes discussion, she played without thinking, her fingers moving with a grace that surprised even her. The melodies were a mix of memory and instinct. Fragments of pieces she had once mastered, mixed with improvisation, emotion, and feeling. Each note carried something unspoken, a longing, a release. A reminder that there was more to life than balance sheets and profit margins. The executives, normally so composed and controlled, were visibly affected. Some leaned against tables, their arms crossed, their brows furrowed as they listened intently. Others softened, their faces relaxing as the music reached them in ways words never could. Time seemed to blur. The meeting, the preparations, the stress-awe faded into the background as she played. She was aware of people entering and watching, but she no longer felt self-conscious. The music was hers, and through it, she spoke a language that everyone understood, even if they could not name it. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, the tension dissipating, the rigid control loosening in the presence of something beautiful and unexpected. A senior executive stepped forward, clearly impressed and surprised. He gestured for the others to pause, and the room fell silent. All eyes were on her, the cleaner at the piano. Yet she played as if she were performing in a concert hall, not a conference center. The music became a bridge between worlds, the world of high finance, negotiation, and authority, and the world of human emotion, creativity, and expression. It was a moment of unexpected connection, a pause in the relentless pace of business that allowed people to remember something fundamental and human. She continued to play, her emotions rising and falling with the music, the notes echoing in the large room. She could see subtle signs of change in the executive's posture softening, tension easing, eyes brightening. Some closed their eyes, lost in the sound, while others leaned in, listening as if the music were revealing truths that had been hidden under the weight of responsibility and expectation. The hall, usually dominated by the authority of numbers and schedules, became a space of shared human experience, where everyone present was reminded of beauty, creativity, and presence. Eventually, the melody slowed, softening to a delicate conclusion. She lifted her hands from the keys, breathing heavily, aware of the room around her in a new way. The executives were silent, absorbing what had just happened. The senior executive who had first noticed her stepped closer, nodding with genuine respect. No one spoke at first. The silence was filled with awe, appreciation, and perhaps a hint of humility. The piano, once silent and overlooked, had transformed the atmosphere, shifted the dynamics, and reminded everyone present of the unexpected power of human talent and expression. The meeting resumed, but it was no longer the same. The tension that had gripped the room earlier had softened. Conversations were calmer, decisions approached with a sense of perspective, and the presence of the music lingered in the minds of everyone there. She returned to her cleaning duties quietly, invisible once more, but carrying a profound sense of accomplishment. She had touched people without words, had influenced a high-stakes environment with something intangible yet deeply felt. The piano had become more than an object. It had been a conduit for connection, empathy, and respect. Throughout the day, she remained aware of glances, subtle nods, and the occasional whispered remark, acknowledging her skill. She stayed professional, completing her tasks with precision, but there was a quiet pride in her heart. She had reclaimed a part of herself that she had thought lost forever and had shared it in a way that mattered profoundly. Even if the world around her was slow to recognize it, the piano remained in her mind as both a challenge and a promise. A reminder that talent and passion could find their way into the most unexpected places. By the end of the day, as the executives departed and the hall emptied once more, she approached the piano again, her fingers brushing over the keys with reverence. She did not play immediately, but she felt the pulse of the music lingering in her fingertips. A reminder that the experience had changed something within her. She packed her cleaning supplies, walked through the quiet halls, and stepped outside into the fading light of the city. She carried with her the knowledge that her life, her work, and her passion could intersect in unexpected ways. That even the smallest actions could have profound effects, and that her music, long hidden, was still a force capable of touching lives in ways she had never imagined. After the music filled the hall, quiet tension lingered. The executives, who had been accustomed to order, control, and precision, were momentarily disarmed. They were struck by the skill, emotion, and presence of the woman who had dared to play. At first, some of them exchanged skeptical glances, unsure of how to respond. A cleaner performing in the middle of a billion-dollar meeting was unexpected, even audacious. Their initial judgment was instant. How could someone in a uniform, someone invisible for years, command attention in a room that usually measured worth by status and wealth? She had not noticed the subtle shift in their attitudes. Her hands rested lightly on the keys as she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, catching her reflection in the black polished surface of the piano. For years she had felt unseen, overlooked, and dismissed. But now, their eyes were on her. They were trying to reconcile the reality of what they were witnessing with the expectations they had carried into the room. She had always known that talent was not always recognized, that skill and passion often remained hidden behind circumstance. Today, the world was forcing them to confront it. One senior executive, whose expression had initially been one of disapproval, stepped closer, his arms crossed but his eyes softening. He studied her intently, observing the movement of her fingers, the posture of her body, the subtle confidence that radiated from her despite the uniform she wore. For a moment it was as if the room had become a concert hall instead of a boardroom. And she, the center of attention not because of position or title, but because of raw, undeniable talent. The sound she had created had broken through their preconceptions, leaving a space for something more profound than business metrics and negotiations. A few executives whispered to each other, glancing at her with curiosity and perhaps a little shame. They had judged her quickly, assumed her role, and yet the music had demanded acknowledgement. The initial discomfort began to fade as admiration quietly emerged. Some of them leaned forward in their seats, listening with rapt attention. The conversation that had been filled with tension and impatience now became muted, punctuated only by the lingering resonance of the piano's notes. She began to play again. Tentatively at first, aware of every eye upon her. The room had shifted. The air was different, lighter, and more attentive. She allowed the music to carry her, to speak in ways words could not. The melodies were a mixture of memory and emotion, each note conveying a story of struggle, sacrifice, and persistence. She was telling her own story without uttering a word, and the executives, despite themselves, were moved. They were confronted with the human truth she presented, a reminder that skill, passion, and courage could exist in unexpected places. As she continued, the senior executive who had first approached began to nod subtly, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. He recognized the rarity of such talent, the authenticity and depth that could not be taught or fabricated. The other executives, too, were affected. Their previous judgment, formed in seconds based on appearance and status, dissolved in the face of undeniable artistry. They were no longer evaluating a cleaner. They were witnessing an individual whose expression transcended social roles and expectations. The music carried the room into a different rhythm. Decisions previously pressured and mechanical now seemed to flow more naturally. Tension between executives softened. Ideas were exchanged with less edge. And even the most skeptical participants allowed themselves to be present in the moment. The cleaner at the piano had shifted the atmosphere entirely. Without a single word, she had reminded everyone of the value of presence, of the human element that often gets lost amidst contracts and calculations. She played a piece that built gradually, notes weaving in and out, carrying emotion and power, but never overwhelming the space. The executives leaned in, their previous impatience replaced by focus and unexpectedly. The sound filled the room, echoing softly off the walls. Blending with the polished wood and muted colors of the conference hall, she could feel the attention without pressure. It was a recognition that had nothing to do with her role or title and everything to do with the music itself. Some of the executives whispered quietly among themselves, sharing impressions and silent admiration. It was clear that the music had reached them in a way nothing else could. The cleaner, who had once been invisible, was now the focal point of their awareness. They were confronted with the limits of their assumptions, the error of judging someone solely by appearance or occupation. Her performance had demonstrated that true ability and passion do not always come in expected packages. When she finally allowed the final notes to fade, the room remained quiet for a moment longer than expected. Silence is a rare and powerful thing in spaces filled with authority and negotiation. The executives were processing what had just occurred, realizing that something remarkable had happened. The senior executive stepped forward, a gesture of recognition and respect, and nodded gently. There was no need for words. The acknowledgement was profound. Her music had spoken, and they had listened. Their perceptions altered by a simple yet extraordinary act. Some executives approached her cautiously, curiosity overtaking hesitation. Questions were asked not about her cleaning duties, but about the music, her background, and her skill. She responded modestly, quietly, her voice calm but firm. Acknowledging her training and the years she had spent away from the piano, they listened intently, surprised by the depth and sincerity of her answers. The initial shock had transformed into admiration, and in that moment, she was no longer just a cleaner. She was an artist, a human being whose talent demanded respect and attention. The shift in perception was palpable. People who had dismissed her now regarded her with a new understanding. There was respect in their eyes, curiosity in their voices, and, most importantly, recognition that she had changed the room in ways that numbers and schedules never could. It was a moment that redefined her presence. A turning point where the invisible became visible, where talent broke through the constraints of circumstance. As the meeting continued, the energy in the room was transformed. The executives were calmer, more focused, and more receptive to each other's ideas. The pressure that had weighed on the space earlier seemed to lift slightly, placed by an unspoken acknowledgement of something more than deals and outcomes. They had been reminded of the human element in a world that often values efficiency over expression, decisions over emotion, and results over connection. Throughout it all, she returned to her cleaning duties quietly, finishing her tasks with care and attention. She did not seek praise or recognition. The impact of her music was its own reward. Yet she was acutely aware of the change she had wrought. The executives no longer saw her solely as a cleaner. They saw a person of skill, depth, and courage. She had demonstrated that influence and presence are not determined by title or uniform, but by the authenticity and passion one brings to the world. As the day progressed, she found herself glancing at the piano, her connection to it renewed and strengthened. The experience had reminded her that her talent, long dormant, was still alive and capable of profound impact. The executives, too, carried the memory of the music with them, subtle but undeniable influence on their interactions and decisions. The cleaner had become a catalyst, showing that even in the most structured and high-pressure environments, humanity and creativity could leave an indelible mark. By the end of the day, the meeting had concluded successfully, with agreements reached and decisions made. The executives departed, but the impression of her performance lingered. She approached the piano one last time, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. She did not play, but she did not need to. The resonance of her earlier performance remained, a reminder that her presence had been recognized and her talent appreciated. She packed her cleaning supplies, walked through the quiet halls, and stepped outside into the evening air. The city was alive, and so was she. The invisible had become visible. Judgment had turned to respect. And the piano had transformed not only the room, but also her own understanding of what was possible. The next morning, she arrived at the conference center with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness that she could not fully explain. After the previous day's events, the piano had become more than just an instrument. It was a symbol of possibility, a reminder that she was capable of more than anyone had imagined. The executives had left with their deals concluded, but their attention had shifted, and a new awareness of her presence lingered. She walked through the halls quietly, carrying her cleaning supplies, her mind alive with the memory of the music and the faces that had watched and listened. Her routine began as usual: wiping tables, arranging chairs, emptying trash bins, but everything felt different. There was a subtle change in the air, a sense of potential, possibility that the invisible could become visible, that skill and passion could open doors where none had existed before. The piano sat in its corner, gleaming under the morning light, waiting patiently as if it understood the change that had occurred. She approached it, running her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the familiar sensation that had always brought her solace and strength as she worked. She noticed the senior executive from the previous day entering the hall. He approached her quietly, a subtle smile on his face that conveyed respect and acknowledgement. He did not speak immediately, letting the moment hang in the air. When he finally addressed her, his voice was warm and sincere. He asked about her musical background, her training, and the years she had spent away from the piano. She answered humbly, sharing her story without embellishment, her words carrying the weight of experience and the quiet pride of someone who had persevered